Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. I was privileged to speak at All Souls College a few years ago about football and the entertainment business and how we've grown that football business over the years. We've progressed sizably in the last 10 years. So I'm going to talk indulgently for a moment about myself and how I came to where I am, and the book that I've just published. But I also want to discuss the world of football, the world of entertainment, and how we, I think, created probably the biggest entertainment on this planet, which is football, other than sex probably. I think football is probably the second biggest entertainment on the planet. For me, I'd had a record production company for some years and sold out. It was a bizarre time in my life because I was married previously and my first wife was quite sick and she passed away 2 days after I sold out. So for somebody who was absolutely geared to making money in life, suddenly that money, and I was fairly wealthy when I sold out, actually didn't mean a great deal. In fact, it didn't mean anything. And I spent the next 2 years not having to work. I was 29. I didn't have to work particularly, and I just spent it living in the bottom of a whiskey bottle because that was a place where I thought I'd find comfort. It's funny, you don't really. You know, you find comfort for a few hours and then your head hurts, and you go back and do it all over again. So my life into football started with a phone call to, at that time I'd escaped to Los Angeles. My life in football began with a phone call from a friend of mine in London who said, "You're never going to believe this, but your hero," my hero was a guy called Alan Skirton as a young man, because Alan played number 7 for Arsenal, and I was an Arsenal fan. I used to watch him, and he was the man I wanted to be. I actually wasn't that good, so I didn't become number 7 at Arsenal. And Alan had finished his career, and my friend called me in Los Angeles and said, he's a milkman, and he's delivering milk to Highbury, the Arsenal ground, and they won't let him in to the stadium anymore. He's just a milkman. He can't come in and have a cup of tea anymore. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. Here was a guy who played in front of 70,000 people, was my hero and many other people's heroes for so long, and just discarded because he'd retired. And I thought, I'm going to change this. So that was my moment. And I came back here and buddied up with a friend of mine called Paul Mariner, who was at the time an ex-England footballer, and we put together a marketing campaign for the England football team. And the England football team had organised themselves into a little group for marketing, but I'm talking 1986, and really there wasn't a lot of football marketing going on. There's a lot of agents selling stories to newspapers, but that was about it. So we created this marketing campaign, which I had seen take place in Los Angeles. There was a team I used to follow called the LA Raiders, who were dressed as pirates. They were the antitheses of anything that was good in sport, and yet it was just family fun and entertainment. And that hadn't really happened in English sport at all. And I was fortunate enough to be able to have the England team as my first client. And I went to places like Coca-Cola and I said, you know, we can have a bit of fun here, and I can give you the England team, and we can do some stuff, and we can begin to put, and bear in mind the 80s, some of you probably weren't just about around in the 80s. It was a bad time in football. You know, people were dying in stadia. There was Hillsborough, there was Heysel, there was Bradford, and a lot of fights, a lot of aggravation, a lot of stuff going off the pitch. And yet this is our national sport, our national entertainment. So anyway, I brought Coca-Cola in, and the FA wouldn't allow me to do anything. They'd sold the England team to Umbro as a sponsor. So we had to sabotage the FA on a continual basis. And there's some wonderful footage of how we did it. So Coca-Cola took advertising round the ground at Wembley, and I was allowed by the then England manager Bobby Robson to tell the players where the advertising boards were, and when England scored, they would run to the boards and celebrate in front of these advertising boards, which is ridiculous really, because there was no coordination, and sometimes they'd score and you'd see them go, yeah, and then they'd all start looking around as to where the board might be and sprint off 70 yards down and celebrate in front of the board, which was all great, except, again, we got it wrong, because celebrating in front of the board, of course, obliterated what the board was saying. So we then had to get the team to, and Paul Gascoigne was brilliant at this. I said, look, lads, can we dive can we, when you celebrate, can one of you fall over and dive on the deck, and then you can pile on top of him? And now we were getting reaction. Now Coca-Cola was saying, God, that's a sensational piece of marketing. So this was now 1987, 88. We're beginning to get a bit of traction. We had a deal with Nike, which was also just as silly. When a substitute came off the field of play, when the player came off and the substitute came on, the substitute was told to stop 10 yards onto his run on the pitch and tie his bootlaces up. And in those days, there weren't 37 cameras like there are now. There were about 3. So the producer of the TV signal had nothing to focus on but the oncoming player. And he's there tying his bootlaces up, and there's the big Nike flash on the boots. And nobody ever asked, why didn't he tie his bootlaces up before he got on the pitch? But anyway, we got away with it until one day we had the coach, the coach's assistant, a nice man called Norman Medhurst. We were in Norway for an England-Norway friendly, and we'd plastered his physio bag with Treeball with the sponsor, and they had this ridiculous slogan, suck a strong one or something. You couldn't get away with that today. And we'd plastered this on his bag, and about the 70th minute he ran on. The player was lying on the floor, so we put the bag next to him, and we got a really strange reaction of what was going on, because we'd got the translation wrong, and we'd actually put on the bag, suck a hard one. And so at that point, my wings were clipped a little bit. But by this time, we'd made a statement, and we were beginning to show that fun and football and the entertainment value can actually be real. So I was fortunate enough, by the way, by complete default, to land a second client called Diego Maradona. And I got him by accident because I was a friend of Ozzy Ardiles. I don't know whether you remember Ozzy Ardiles, he was a footballer at Spurs. And Ozzy Ardiles and I had arranged to meet each other, and twice I cancelled because of the traffic and something else happened. And on the third time, he wasn't very happy with me. And I got to his house and we were chit-chatting, and Maradona phones him complaining that he's upset with his agent, and could Ozzy, his best friend, look after him. And so Ozzy puts his hand over the phone and says, "Do you fancy managing Maradona?" And that was how I got Diego Maradona. So now the England team and Diego Maradona, which was fabulous. And now I was beginning to make an impact. And there were discussions about how we would create something which was better than the Football League. And David Dean, Alan Sugar, and Philip Carter, and a couple of other people, and a man called Rupert Murdoch, started talking to me about how we would create fun in football. So long story short, the Premier League began, and I was sort of detailed to bring the fun to the programming. So you may or may not remember, in 1992 when the Premier League started, we had dancing girls and we had fireworks, and it was shit. I mean, it was really bad production. It really wasn't great at all. But again, we were showing the fun side of sport. But we did one really clever thing. I went to Capital Radio and the various other radio stations, and we took sport from AM radio to FM. And now we had a whole new audience, and they were called women. And suddenly, and we sold it sexist, in a sexist manner, look at the sexy legs, look at all that. Well, rubbish, really. But, but it brought in that new audience, and we'd sort of doubled our audience in time. And now we knew we had to start bringing in the stars of the game. So we started importing various talents, Freddie Ljungberg, Ruud Gullit, ultimately Claudio Ranieri and people like that. Claudio, when he came to England, said to me, he said, I love you English. He said, you take the roof off your cars when it's only 17 degrees. We don't do that till it's 27 degrees in Italy. We had, and we were starting to make it fun, and this whole Sky feature of making it entertainment was what we were all about. So, but we learnt new words. In Europe, the tax regimes were considerably lax by comparison to our then Inland Revenue Service, now HMRC. And we were trying to bring in stars that were being paid houses, cars, and this wonderful word called netto. Whatever your income was, it was netto. It was a net of any tax. And we just couldn't do that. So over the years, people like me started inventing things. And we invented things like the loyalty bonus, which was paid if you stayed for a while. You didn't have to stay that long. and it sort of circumvented the contract, because a football contract is a football contract, and it's stuck in its own parameters. But the loyalty bonus could be added on. We started to do things like the employment benefit trusts. We made a decision that a player was a staff member and therefore should share in the incentives of any staff member of that football club, albeit they were transient and subject to their contracts. And we made this plea to the revenue, if you like, that we could substantiate them getting benefits of shares and cash bonuses that went into a scheme which were tax efficient. And the revenue ran that with us for about 2 years and then got very heavy with us and started fining everyone. And actually it was a cataclysm, because it ended up being the one single part of the financial equation that brought Glasgow Rangers Football Club to its knees. So that wasn't one of our greatest successes. But by this time again, we were learning how to bring in the greatest talent on our planet. Now we were selling our signal to some 80, 90 countries around the world. We started looking at how we could bring in even bigger talents and how we would make that happen. So let me bring that right up to date now. We're now selling our product to some 142 countries, and we reach about 1.5 billion eyeballs every weekend. And it's, as I said at the start of this, probably the biggest entertainment on this planet. And you'll read all sorts of things like, he's on £100,000 a week. Well, he's probably not. He's probably on £60,000 a week, because we've started putting things like bonuses in place. Now, in the confines of this room, the bonuses work. This is going on YouTube. That's good, isn't it? So we're in the confines of this room and YouTube. The bonuses work in a number of different ways, but essentially, if a player is chosen in the first team squad in a starting lineup, he gets whatever he gets. A lot of the contracts are now configured with bonuses that if he comes on at half time, he gets half as much again. If he comes on later in the second half, he gets reduced bonuses. But those bonuses are very high, because if you're on sizable contracts, that bonus for a second half appearance after, the caveats were normally 45 minutes, 60 minutes, and 75 minutes. So those bonuses are actually quite high. So it's interesting, if you're football fans, to actually look at your team and see the management substitutions. And I won't cast aspersions, because normally they are done for football reasons, but sometimes, more often than sometimes and a bit, you'll see clubs substitute in the 61st, 65th, 72nd, 73rd minute. They're actually saving their club 30, 40, 50,000 pounds by bringing him on then, as opposed to the 59th minute. And sometimes at the very end, you'll see players coming on at the 89th minute. Sometimes it's to hold play up and disturb the pattern of play if the other side's attacking you. But sometimes it's to say to the guy who's trained really hard and worked really well this week, go on son, off you go and earn yourself 20 quid in the 20,000 pounds, 20 quid, 20,000 pounds in the last minute. So that's sort of life as we know it. And there's some interesting things that go on. And I'm a fan of the eclectic ownership that's in the Premier League. I believe that the foreign ownership has been good for us. It throws up some interesting dichotomies, though, because foreign ownership brings with it corporate habits from a foreign environment. And I choose my words carefully, but very often there are times in the transactions of a football deal, and these deals are not easy, by the way, and they're very rapacious. If Noah's being touted by his agent and 3 clubs are interested and 2 agents want to get in on the deal, everybody's fighting everyone else. This is not a particularly clean way of living. I've said publicly, and I'll say again here, probably 75% of our business in England is pretty clean. But there's some pretty dark corners. There's clubs that will pay agents a commission, and I'm citing this as an actual example, a £10 million transfer where a foreign agent is brought in and paid £6 million commission. That is the club washing cash out this country and washing it into a place where the authorities don't really want to look, like Turkey or the eastern part of Europe, where the money goes into, shall we say, interesting collectives, and the authorities don't really want to look at that. And we'll talk about that in a second. So going back to the football clubs and ownership, we're now in positions where they have a different attitude to a corporate deal, and it's difficult for me to sit here and say I think we're right and they're wrong. If you go to an Asian environment corporately, sometimes it's a different way of doing business. There are certain customs, there's certain elegances of transaction that don't happen here. And there are certain times when you need to pay certain people who are in that deal to make sure that they feel that they're part of that transaction. I mean, I've sat, even in Europe, I've sat in meetings, in particular, this happens in Italy. Are there any Italians here? I don't want to offend. You are? Okay. Well, I'm going to be mildly offensive, not really. Saying it with love and you can see me afterwards. I'm saying it with love and affection. The Italians and to a lesser degree the Spanish have this wonderful way of negotiating where when it gets a bit tough, they get up and walk out. But they don't really get up and walk out. They want to walk out, but actually they don't want to walk out, but they want to make out as if they're walking out. So they make a big fuss of putting all the papers in the bags and everything, and you know they don't want to go, but they're going because they're upset that you won't agree their point. So it's always good to have something in your back pocket, not physically, just an idea, just in case. So on this particular deal, we've had a sort of near walkout, and they've come back, and everything's fine. And these deals always seem to finish at midnight, and they always seem to say to you afterwards, "Let's go for dinner," and you're like, "Oh God." So this particular transaction, we'd had the walkout, and it was all going really well. It's about 11:15, 11:30 at night, and I'm beginning to look at my watch, and the guy opposite me, the Italian negotiator from the other side, is looking at my watch, and I'm thinking, oh, thank God we're nearly there, and he's going to want to go home now, because us English negotiators, we just want to go home. And he keeps looking at my watch, and I'm saying to him, is everything okay? He said, oh, I like your watch. I went, oh, good, it's fine. I didn't want to say it was a present because I knew what was happening next. He wanted me to give him his watch. I wasn't offended by it. I knew it was part of a process. I'm being friendly to him. It had happened to me before, so it was a nice watch, but not too nice. And I didn't want to offend him by saying it was a present because he couldn't take it then. So I said, oh yeah, it's something I just picked up at the airport. Oh, listen, take this. Let's call it a day. It's fine. Paperwork done. Everything gets sorted. And then he said, let's go for dinner. And I'm like, oh no. So in Eastern Europe, there are many gangs that operate. In the eastern part of our planet, there are many operators that. But I was always taught at university. I didn't go to university, college, and university graduates have taught me, and business school people have taught me. Really, a good quorum for a business meeting or a board of directors is about seven or eight people, because you can get things done. Typically, the guys coming from Asia tend to travel in packs, so they can be the football club that's selling can have 2 or 3 advisors, plus a lawyer, plus an accountant, plus a translator. So they've got 5 people on that side. The buying or vending club this side's probably got 2 or 3 people. The agent's got 2 people, and there's a player who's probably not there. So for me, I always like to put people into silos so I could pick off the people that I wanted to talk to at that time. And it was interesting that I found you had to use, and I was hesitant to say, I said I had to choose my words carefully, and I'm still thinking about it. I sort of went off subject to come back to this to find the right word, and I still haven't found it, so I'm going to say inducements. So I had to find inducements in the process to keep everybody happy. Now, that comes back to England, and if that's found out and reported in the paper, it changes from the word inducement to bung. And that's where everyone goes up in arms. And so what I'm going to say now, and what I'm going to try and propose, because I've become a senior citizen of the footballing community, what I want to try and propose now is that there's a moratorium on all this discussion about the moralistic fibre. We're football. We're a sport trying to be a business. We are a business now. We're nothing like the oil business or the arms business, and that's a lot more corrupt than we are. There are practices all around the world that we have to respect, not criticize. So if there is a method of negotiation, if there's an understanding, if we're in this inclusive society in Britain, we have to understand and work within the confines of acceptance of the bartering society that exists in other parts of the world, or respect their modus operandi and not criticize it because we're British and we don't do it that way, do we? So what I'm going to propose and what we're going to discuss publicly, I think, in the next year or so, is we're going to ask for all parties. So when I say we, by the way, I'm just talking on behalf of the Association of Football Agents, which I helped form, which now contains 600 or 700 of the biggest agents. There's actually, you know what? There's actually only 10 agents that do any real business. But there's another 590 out there who sort of make up the numbers. We've sort of, FIFA gave this up. FIFA said, we're not interested in regulation. We'll give it to the local associations. The local associations do it with a good heart, but they actually are never at the coalface, so they don't know what really goes on. So take third-party ownership, for instance. That's been a big issue because Sam Allardyce allegedly got fired because of it, or because of comments about it. Third-party ownership is when someone like I go into South America or Africa at the moment, and we find a club whose asset value is less than this glass of water, and it's a shack and a couple of footballs and a few players. And we say to those people, here's an investment. It can be 50,000, it could be 10,000, it could be £1 million. Pounds, dollars, whatever. Actually the same sort of thing at the moment, pounds and dollars, isn't it? And we then co-own the assets of that club. So now when that asset travels north and it comes to England, we own a piece of it. And yet, the regulation now says you can't do that. But you can in Portugal and you can in Spain. So it's all a little bit daft. Whereas here, agents have been charged for, if I'm selling Noah to a football club, I'm selling him to West Ham because they need everyone they can get at the moment. And I really believe in Noah, and I say my commission's £150,000, but you know what? Just give me 100 and I'll take 50 times 10 times 5, whatever it is, if you sell him on for 5 million, 10 million, whatever, over time. I think I'm doing a good job for my client. I think I'm doing a good job for the club because I'm showing faith in the product that I've brought to them. The Football Association will charge me and take my license away when that transaction happens because they call it third-party ownership. So for me, that demonstrates that with a good heart they go into this and haven't got a clue. So what I want to do is get everyone, I want to get the AFA, which is us, the Premier League, the Football League, the PFA, the LMA, all the parties together, and let's have a year's moratorium about how we make regulation work, because it's really not working at the moment. It really is not. It's a great business, one of the most exciting products in world sport, and it's just not being governed correctly because the governors of the sport have sort of advocated that responsibility, and they really don't know what goes on at the grassroots. So that's something I'm calling for. I think it will happen. I think my voice is loud enough now. And certainly the media seem to like hearing from me, so I can keep banging that drum. There's some real opportunity for us now, because I think we've reached an interesting point. I don't think Sky, who have funded this revolution in England that I became part of in '92, I don't think Sky can go much higher financially. So I think we are where we are. And everyone now expects Amazon, Google, Yahoo to come in and fund it. But actually, there's a bigger industry running alongside football than football itself. And Amazon, Google, and Yahoo have got it all. And actually, Facebook have got a lot more than everybody else. It's the social media that sits alongside of it. So you have Manchester United play Manchester City on a midday kickoff on a Saturday, and we all get excited, and it's great for 2 or 3 days, and we talk about it. Meanwhile, 5 or 6 days later, the chatter's going all the way around the world. Billions of people are discussing it. And Facebook are sitting there collating all of your and every other billion person's data. They're collecting it, they've got the analytics, they've got the data, they've got the advertising around it, and they're sitting there saying, why should we pay 10 billion for this product? We've got it all for nothing. And they're earning more money by sitting alongside it in social media. So the social media revolution hasn't even been felt yet in football. And I think football will do well continually for a while longer. We have exploratory geography. We've got India. We haven't really even begun to explore India with football, and they love it. And they love football in India. It's going to overly eat into the cricket market over the next decade. America, baseball's losing its market at the younger end, predominantly because social media is driving soccer. And so we've got all that growth yet. Don't expect Amazon yet to come and play. I think they'll sit there with all their analytics. They don't have to do anything else. But there's a fascinating social media world that's going to, and if any of you are in social media courses or anything to do with that, that is going to dynamically grow over the next 5 years in particular. There are fortunes to be made in that world. But I love the world of football. I love where it's taken me. I love the custom. I love the silly times I've had. I remember going to talk to the South African Premier League because they thought I knew what I was talking about. And they invited me to then. I had all the clubs and the tribal chiefs around a big table, about 40 of them. And the guy who was my host at the time said, "This is Jon Smith. He's come from England. He helped launch the Premier League in England." He said, "He's going to have a talk to you. And before we begin, I want to put arms on the table." So I think this is a bit strange. So I do this, and everyone else does this and takes the guns out. And I kind of love moments like that. And I love some of the weird things that we've done. We had a wonderful player called Sasa Churchic once who really wanted to come and play his football in England. And we couldn't get him in because at that time, I think he was Croatian, he was Serbian. And Serbia wasn't in the EC at the time. And we got to a point where we just couldn't, he just didn't make the regulation work. So we sat around the office and we said, well, the only way we can do this is actually to get him married. And so no, we can't do that, can we? No, we really can't. We really can't do stuff like that. And I promise you this is true, it's in the book. About 3 hours later, we're still sitting there. We're about to take Sasa out for a few drinks, and we've invited a few people to come and join us. And this really pretty lady walks in the office, and Sasa's eyes light up. And he said, you wanted me to get married? He said, I'm going to marry her. So we introduced them. And anyway, they got married. I can't tell you the rest. And he got his visa as well, surprising, really. Anyway, so there's so many of these. I've loved the time that the sport has offered me. I've loved, in my time in music, I was involved in Northern Soul. I don't know whether any of you remember Northern Soul. It was sort of R&B with a very fast beat, and we had a number of very big successes over the years. And for me, sport and entertainment is an industry that I've helped create. I've only done a little bit about it, but it's been a real pleasure. It's been really exciting and great fun, and made a lot of headlines, including tonight. Before I came here, I recorded something for the BBC News tonight because Ched Evans has been found innocent today. And that's a very difficult emotion. I don't know whether you want to discuss this or whether you want me to just articulate something about it.
Talk about it.
It's a very difficult emotion because I've been lucky enough to be media educated, but you have cameras, and cameras can be these things. They can be mobile phones, and you say something and it's out there forever. There's no such thing anymore as today's news is tomorrow's chip paper. Everything is on the record. And to stand up and defend Ched Evans, non-rapist, in a sporting environment which has become socially influential is a really difficult thing to do in what the news at 10 are going to do to me tonight, which is chop me down to 10 seconds. So I have to try and say, with all absolute honesty and integrity, we abhor rape, but we endure the success of the British legal system. And then you articulate that the sadness is, for Ched, he's lost 5 years of a 12-year career, and he'll never get that back. That can't be right, but that's life, I guess. It's where we are. I can't think of a better system. So for all the successes and all the money that exists, and by the way, just running alongside there is that comment about money. I don't have a problem with the money in football. These guys are going to produce £9 billion worth of income. Our football is probably the biggest emotional export since the Beatles in the 60s. I don't have a problem with them being paid a lot of money because it's commensurate to the 9 billion earnings that they make, and they say there's too much money in football. Lewis Hamilton jumps into a car, gets paid £1 million for driving that car for 2 hours. I don't have a problem with that either. That's the value. That's what he's being paid. That's what he's helping generate. But no one says he shouldn't be paid that. But they'll say it with footballers, because footballers have this affinity to the working class gentleman that can never earn that kind of money. And I accept that, and I think the fans should be given a break, by the way, here and there. I think some of the prices are stupid. I think some of the football clubs just charge for everything, and the food's crap, and they charge you the highest of prices. So, I have great sympathy for that, all of that. Then what I've tried to do is just squidge into 15 minutes, maybe I've overrun that a little bit now, forgive me, just to say that this industry is so much more than what you see. It's so endurable, and it's going to touch a lot of you and a lot of your friends and a lot of your associates in many ways. When I travel, forget that I travel on football business, when I travel to any corner of the world, from Honolulu in the west to Hong Kong in the east, the second conversation, other than hello, how are you, is about football. If you can pontificate and know something about it, and know and understand the social media that surrounds it, I think it's a benefit to everyone. So I'm grateful to it. I'm very grateful for your ears and your time. And I hope that I've thrown a little bit of light into our growing industry.
Well, great, that's so interesting. Thanks, Jon. I'm going to ask you a few questions based on what you've just said, and then I'm going to throw it up to the audience. You talked about the complications and the discrepancies in third-party ownership here and in other countries. Is there a part of you that feels a little bit sorry for Sam Allardyce?
I am sorry for Sam Allardyce. I mean, he was stupid to be there. Stupidity isn't a crime yet. I was sad that he was there because, from a footballing perspective, he was a good manager. And I think I don't like. There's a queasiness, isn't there? About entrapment. It's a bit like that police officer standing under the 30, 40 miles, when you drive and you're at 40 miles an hour and you're coming down to 30, and the police officer standing there with his speed gun just behind the sign. I think that's entrapment, and yet he'll write the report and say, well, another serious crime solved. And I really don't like that. So I'm sorry for Sam, but it was stupid. He didn't say anything that was illegal, although the file's been passed to the police, I understand, so I guess I should withhold comments until that has been at least pontificated by the police. But I think the weight of evidence was just too much. I mean, he was bad-mouthing people, which he shouldn't have done, and when you start bad-mouthing the royal family, there's no place for you, I'm afraid.
Okay, that's very interesting. And again, on this point of national football and international football, you just talked about how your career was sort of galvanised by really creating this England team brand. Now, of course, we're very conscious of this England team brand, but we're also conscious of how bad the England team is, and it's thrust into further crisis by this very awkward managerial situation. Do you think English football can be salvaged? What needs to be done, or is it just a matter of what happens on the pitch?
There's a chapter right at the end of the book, and I would plug it, excuse me doing the old overt plug, about Brexit. Now we've got to make a choice, because in the next 2 years we will no longer be part of the European Union. As far as we're concerned now, we've got a blank sheet of paper, we can write the script. What are we going to do? Are we going to focus on the England team and therefore start closing the doors to foreign talent coming in? If we do that, eventually the Premier League will lose that gloss. It will lose that wonderful, and I use that word again, eclectic mix of talent that we have, which is unique, and mixed with our ever physical, very fast football. It will start osmosing into the continent. It'll start going back to Italy and Spain again, and we won't be in this position in 10 years' time. So you know which side of the argument I'm on. But we will have a better England football team. So the answer to your question is, if the British people decide that if you've had an English sheepdog in the last 4 years, you're allowed to come in and play your football in England because you qualify, and we allow more people to come in, or the status quo, it will continually affect the negativity around the England team, because we won't be putting that resource behind growth of the national team. We'll be putting it beside the continual support of what I've called the greatest entertainment on the planet.
Okay, interesting. You also mentioned that you don't have a problem with the money in the game in terms of salaries, but I'm wondering if you have any fears about further commercialisation of the game. So I thought it was fascinating when you were talking about players running towards advertising billboards and players tying their laces. But what about when product placement becomes very disruptive to the game? For instance, in America, you'll have these commercials in the middle of a match. Do you fear the Premier League going that way?
No, I don't actually, because there is now so much money in the game that we don't need to do that. American sport is born out of a different genre, and I was very involved with American sport. If I was the guy that brought the NFL, the NBA, I owned a team called the London Monarchs for a while at the beginning of the 90s. Great stories actually. I brought the NHL here once, the first time in 2000 and plonk. Actually, no, it was 1900 and something plonk, and we one of the teams was the Chicago Blackhawks, and they had a guy called Stu Grimson. They called him the Grim Reaper because all he ever did was fight everybody. He was like 6'8", man-mountain, and he used to pulverise people on the ice, take his gloves off and fight. So we homed on him because we thought, well, that would be good for the British public. We'll like all this, and we got him a double-page spread in the Sun newspaper. And they were doing a whole big thing. And the night before the piece was going to be published, Stu phones me in my hotel and says, Jon, I can't do this. I went, why? There's naked ladies in the Sun. I went, yes, and your problem is? I'm a born-again Christian. I said, oh. How can you be a born-again? I mean, I understand, I respect it, but how can you be a born-again Christian when you beat the crap out of everybody? He said, that's my job. So anyway, there's varying cultures. I won't say that's a particularly American one. Although I did spend some time with Donald Trump when I was in America, who was actually really bullish. He loves the sound of his voice. You might have noticed.
Football fan?
He's a sports fan. Big. We were at a boxing fight together.
Yeah.
He was an interesting guy, and actually completely off subject. You know, he doesn't actually have to win that much to win this. I know it's probably unlikely, but he's only got to win 2 or 3 swing states, and we're exactly where we were. I was working for the Remain team, by the way. I was in David Cameron's team. It was not my biggest success. I wasn't the guy threatening the British electorate, by the way. I used to sit with my head in my hands when they were going, okay, the Chancellor's going to say tomorrow that we're going to tax people. And I'm like, oh, you can't threaten the electorate. But I was out there. I had this great idea. The first time we talked around the table and they came to me and they said, okay, what do you reckon, Jon? I said, I tell you what, my view is the thing that represents Europe to me and the strength of Europe is the Ryder Cup. It's the only time we feel European, really, because we want to tonk America and we're not big enough and we can't, so we call ourselves European. Hey, let's capture that spirit and let's go and they went, oh, that's really great. Anyway, about 5 days later, we're back in that room and they're going around the table and they said, oh, and by the way, Jon, your idea was rubbish. I went, why? He said, we phoned all the Ryder Cup team and they're all Brexits. So every single one of them. That wasn't the point I was making, but that sort of my stock sort of dropped for a while. So no, the American sports were born out of television. So they were made for television. Our sport is not made for television. Our sport has to accommodate television. So you now have Monday night football and Friday night football and stuff like that, which makes you travel. But essentially, no, I don't. And there's so much money in our sport now, I don't really think that it's going to have that effect. Likewise, with drugs, there's not a lot of drugs in English football. There's always drugs around, but it's minor. It's very minor because the money's big all the way down. There's a lot of drugs in sport because you want to be there, and you need to be there for not only your pride but for your earnings. So you want to be the fastest, the bestest, the strongest. You know, I have to say, Janine and I have got a couple of kids, and one was a really good, fast athlete. I used to run for Britain as a kid, by the way. So that's where the genes come from. It's not from her side of the family, it's mine. And she's got much better attributes than me in other places. So we got to a point where, you know, are we really going to make a decision here about whether, if he's that good, is he really going to have to do what he has to do and take substances. And bear in mind, a lot of the substances that are being taken are herbs. They're just medicated herbs, except the just word comes into it. They've gone from here to here, so those herbs have become substances that give you an added advantage. It always amazes me how many people in cycling suffer from asthma. But it's those sort of questions that worry me about sport. That doesn't exist in football, fortunately, because the money's big all the way down. Sorry.
Sure. Okay, my final question before I pass over to the audience is, what's the toughest negotiation you've ever had to be a part of?
Unquestionably Vladimir Putin, and I didn't realise at the time. I was taking Arshavin from Zenit St. Petersburg to Arsenal, and they were not moving at all. There's a nice guy called Max Mitrofanov ran the case for Zenit. I was representing Arsenal. Arsene Wenger and I were trying to move. They wanted 15 million quid. Arsenal didn't want to go there. And we actually did this with 4 seconds left on the clock in the January transfer window of 2009. I'll tell you about that in a second. So we'd battled in this since the middle of November, and it went from Max Mitrofanov, we realised it wasn't his decision, so it was going upstairs. It went upstairs to a guy called Alexei Miller, who was the chief executive and chairperson of Gazprom. And the previous week, I think he'd cut the Ukraine off from their gas supply. And this week he was being a football agent, which was an interesting dichotomy for him. But when we started negotiating with him, we realised he had to go somewhere else. And eventually somebody told me that this club's owned by the Putin family. And so we ended up negotiating with Putin, who did absolutely nothing but say no, all the way through. And we ended up paying the full price with 4 seconds to go.
Jeez, okay, thanks for that. If you have a question, please put your hand up. Yeah, there's a guy in the red jumper over there.
Hi, as a Cardiff fan, I wondered what you think of rebranding of clubs, like their jerseys, or in the case of Hull, like the name of the club.
Well, it's interesting because I know both of those owners. And they did it for all the right reasons, and they were wrong both times. I think the beautiful thing about our sporting heritage in this country is that word, heritage. We actually do have heritage. And that actually differentiates us from, the Jaguars or the LA Kings or whatever it might be in whatever sport. We are Hull City, and we're from Hull, and we're not called Hull Tigers. We're Hull City, and Assam Allam did it because he felt Tigers would be lucky. And he's a very obstinate man. He told me a great story, actually. He told me that he came to England. He was thrown out by the Nasser regime in Egypt. And his family were reasonably wealthy, and all their wealth was stolen. He was given an English £5 note and put on a boat to England. And he arrived in England with his £5 note, and he started to make his way, or tried to make his way, out of the port. And it was a forged note, so he had no money at all. And they shipped him off to Humberside. And he built a huge empire in the marine world, and now insists, and his son Ehab has taken that mantle on, that every Hull City player has to, so if they sign for Hull, they have to be in an H postcode, so all their money goes back into the local community as a part of a thank you for what the community did for him. So no, simple answer to your question, no, I think the heritage part is something that we should retain.
There's a gentleman in the black jumper over there.
Hi. So I have, I guess, a bit of a weird question. So I have always been fascinated by this phenomenon of agents arising in all kinds of these fields, be it modeling, acting, and I guess football. And like from an outsider's perspective, like myself, it is not often obvious what agents sort of bring to the table. And I think that also motivates a lot of these bad regulations that you were talking about. So if you were speaking to somebody like me, how would you explain, in what is that agents bring to the table and why are they necessary, basically?
Okay, so firstly, if you had, let me talk personally to you. Your name is?
Matjaž.
Matjaž. Where are you from?
Slovenia.
Okay, so now you're a Slovenian, let's say you're a Slovenian tennis player, because Slovenia's produced some good tennis players. The success that you hope to have is going to cost you to begin with, because you need to get on the tennis tours. So if I'm your agent, I've got to buy you onto those tennis tours. Every sport has its own particular peculiarities. If you're a footballer, you need me to try and help you to come out of Slovenia, where, you know, they're not a bad team. They did well the other night. But actually the money's not there, unless you want to be there, unless your career is that's where you want to be, which is fine. But otherwise, you're going to need somebody like me to be able to get you into France, Germany, Italy, Spain, or in most cases, people want to come here. It's difficult to do that on your own. It's difficult to do that through a lawyer. It's nearly impossible to do that through an accountant because they think the wrong way in terms of personal management. There are convolutions of that, by the way. Let me tell you a story about something that's going to happen. There was a transfer this summer that didn't happen. It was a £20-odd million transfer of a player who was 23 years of age. I'm not going to name him because it's not fair yet, because this next deal hasn't happened yet. And the purchasing club offered 25 million. The purchasing club offered 20 million. The selling club wanted 25 million. They ended up somewhere at 22.5, and still the vending club wouldn't sell. So the deal collapsed. But he's 23, which means he's under 24, which means compensation rules then exist. So for a start, you've got to know all these things, which the agents, supposedly good agents, do. At 23, he, as I say, subject to compensation rules, so he can now leave at the end of his contract, which is next year, for £400,000 as opposed to 20 million. If it goes to a tribunal when he's 24, it would be 20-odd million, because that was the starting and the ending point. So the agent involved, and I know him very well, has got a club for him in Belgium. He's going to take him there at the end of this season for £400,000. The Belgian club will say, thank you very much. We've got a lot of talent here for a small amount of money. They'll pay the player a lot more money. He will then play as little or long as he wants to in Belgium, and will probably come back to England for 10, 15 million, and the club that wanted him, or maybe another club, will have him, and they will benefit from that whole system as well. Now, the agent who organised that and has made his player a lot of money and saved the purchasing club a lot of money and made the purchasing club in Belgium a lot of money should be rewarded, and he will. He'll earn about £5 million. And if I just drop that on the table and say, oh, this agent's going to earn £5 million from that deal, everyone would go, oh my God, that's corrupt practice, or at worst it's corrupt practice. At best, why should he be paid that kind of money? But he's done a job. And the numbers are big. I mean, you buy a flat at number 1 Hyde Park, which is a penthouse flat and 3 bedrooms with a balcony overlooking the rest of London, you're going to be paying tens of millions of pounds. The commission to the estate agent's going to be big. It's only commensurate to the size of the deal. So in answer to your question, talent needs us, because talent needs to think about its own talent and how it manufactures that best for that person's self. And my role is to make sure that your talent is rewarded financially, which includes, by the way, looking after making sure you get the right tax advice, making sure you get the right medical advice outside of the club, making sure if you're someone who's not British, that you have the right housing, the right educational process to settle in this country for you and your family. So all of that is part of my job, and that's what I get paid, in some cases, handsomely for.
Great answer, thanks.
Great. So it reminds me of the Ezekiel Friars incident. He was at United, and then he went off to some small-time club, and then was in a Spurs jersey the season after. Yeah. So now I know why that happened.
Do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you see that? And when he's on £100,000 a week, he's not.
Yeah, interesting. This guy right in the corner, back left here.
Hi, using your kind of insider knowledge of the game and the personalities, would you say there's a manager or a player whose reputation is completely out of sync with the way he's portrayed in the media?
Would I think a manager's?
Well, a manager or a player or any figure is...
I think we are in danger of debasing what I think, and I've said it 4 times now, is the greatest entertainment on the planet. Because we like to have a go at it. I find that astonishing that Gareth Southgate got the England job, and after one game, wasn't overly inspiring against Malta, I have to say, but after one game, the story started to emerge that a company he'd put some money into was being investigated because it hadn't paid its tax bill in the right way at the right time, whatever. But it had nothing to do with the company. The headline was Southgate Company under investigation. And I don't like that because it actually has nothing to do with him at all. He's not part of the management, he's just got his money in that company as an investor. So yes, I think in simple terms, the newspapers and the electronic media, and I love them. They've built me up. They've worked with me. I don't want to castigate them, but they are driven by, and I have to say this is the only way that I know. They're driven by negativity, because that's what sells their product. So I come back to where I finished, which is social media changes that, because you are social media, and you are the dynamic now. And if you as a group decide that you don't like that, then you don't watch that. You take it out of the media's hands, you take it off the back pages onto your devices, and and what happens then is journalists, is anyone on a journalist course here? Thank God, because most of them are very lazy. So I just, journalists will look on Twitter to get a lot of their feed information. And where's that Twitter coming from? Coming from you. So in the next 5 years, you are the driver of the news agenda. So handle that responsibility with care, please.
Great. We'll take one more question. Oh, there's a girl in the pink over there.
Hi.
Hi. So, what are some of the essential skills for one to become a football agent? And is football agent a very dangerous or morally challenged job?
Yes, all of the above. What are the most important thing as a football agent is to engage your audience. So as a major football agent, as a super agent, you probably have 50 customers, 50 major clubs around the world. And if you corporately piss them off, they'll still have to deal with you if you've got the player, but they won't give you the business that scoots around them on an annual basis. So numerics are important. You've got to be able to do your sums. You've got to be able to work those sums quickly, because when you're in a room with people and we're talking big monies and tax schemes and various other things that are scooting around you, you have to be able to be on the ball and know how to deal with them. You have to have, I would sort of call it a twinkle in your eye. You have to just be engaging. And controlling. You have to control your environment, because you're the guy who actually everyone in the room thinks is the arsehole. Excuse me, but that's they all hate you. Everyone who's in that room hates you, apart from maybe you've made friends with a couple of people in the club, but they don't want you to be there, except for your player. So when you're engaging with people, I think you have to use a bit of charm and a bit of strength. You have to dominate your space. I said earlier on, you slice people off and put them in silos, and you deal with each situation. These deals go on for weeks, months, and at the nitty-gritty end of it are intensely emotional, because we're dealing in human flesh. And at that point, the father wants what he wants for his son, the mother wants what he wants for his son. There's a group of people, and you have to manage all that. So a couple of silly tips. When it gets really tough, and this is for any negotiation, when it gets really tough, just ask lots of questions. Just don't pontificate yourself. Don't try and push the agenda. If you're stuck on a point, leave the point there. Come away and ask the questions about anything, preferably something else around the deal that you know is an easy, soft number in the deal. So you've moved the mindset of the people in the room away to something that's inoffensive, or the weather, or the state of the economy, anything you want to do. And when you're looking at somebody in the eye and you want to make a point, don't blink, look them in the eye. And the way you don't blink is you look at the bridge of the nose, and then you never blink. And it's really disconcerting for the other side. It's really, and it never fails, because you don't blink. And I could sit and look at you all afternoon, and I will never blink once, because I'm looking at the bridge of your nose. And I can sit here all afternoon, and it's very pleasant. You've got a lovely nose, by the way. And use pauses, because people hang on pauses. When you try and say something that's really important, use the pause, and people suddenly people wake up, their conscience wakes up and they think you're about to say something really dynamic. So only use it when it is reasonably dynamic. But they're otherwise it dissipates. But those are, just silly little tricks really, but you have to be a good negotiator, you have to be a good personal interlocutor, and you have to be calm, really calm. It's an emotional business. Dealing with human beings is an emotional business. Don't get emotional.
Great. We'll take one more just because I saw so many hands. There might be a chance after the event to ask some more questions.
Very happy to hang around.
Okay, we can hang out in the bar afterwards, and there might be
very
some
happy to
books
hang
on
around in
sale.
the bar, especially as my wife's driving. So.
Great. Okay, so we'll take one more question. Then I've got one question. Then we'll head over to the bar.
Sure.
Shall we go to the guy right there? Yeah. Just wave at me.
Hi. Of all the clients that you've represented, which did you find the most demanding or the hardest to accommodate?
Oh, definitely Diego Maradona, because I was having to deal with the Italian mafia. I didn't say that. Did I say Italian?
No, you
mafia?
didn't.
With some people in Italy. Diego was fabulous. He was all of 5'2", had immense talent. He'd walk in this room, and even if you didn't know who he was, you'd look at him, because God just sprinkled a bit of special dust on him when he was born, and he just had that immense charm, and his smile lit up a room. And I brought him here a couple of times. He just, and we did his Coca-Cola deal. I was going to say we did his first Coke deal, actually. But the problem was that he just attracted these awful people around him. And so I used to go and see him in Naples, and there'd be like 20 people there. And there was one guy who I got friendly with called Nestor Garasito, and I used to say to him, Nestor, what are these people doing? Why are they here? And Naples being a very religious city, there's big posters of Jesus everywhere hanging off of buildings, and next to that, big posters of Diego Maradona. He was that much of an icon. So we'd drive around in his Ferrari, and he had special I got this for him. We went to the Naples police because we drove around in his Ferrari once, and some the people jumped on it and he got stuck in the traffic lights. It was just mayhem. You just couldn't drive. So I went to the police chief and I got him special dispensation to drive through red traffic lights in Naples. So and we put that to use one afternoon. We got one of the Ferraris out. We're out and doing this stuff and going through the street. This is great fun. He was like a little kid. He was just a lovely boy with immense talent. There's a fabulous YouTube clip of him signing autographs in the warm-up with his boots undone, playing keepy-uppy on 2 feet with 1, 2, 3 balls. I mean, the guy had immense talent. But whatever we did, there was moments of wonderful closeness with him, and then he'd dissipate into this group of people, and you knew you could never break through. When I remember in 1987, I brought him to England for the Football League centenary game. And I'd said to Diego, I think you should come. You've just shown that you are the hand of God. You know, come and say sorry, come and be there, come and, ingratiate yourself to the English public. And he said, yeah, fine, okay. And then those people got involved. And the price went up and up and up and up until, in the end, I had to tell Ken Bates, who was running the show, the price was £250,000. And that's all those idiots that were around him. And they were all taking a piece of him. And that's what aggravated me. They were doing nothing but winding him up. Until in the end, the Italian mafia became part of that. The local Camorra got into him, and I had this strange conversation one day about a year and a half in, and they said to me, John, come on. So I went into a little corner of the room, and 2 of these guys said to me, we'd like to say thank you. And I went, you're welcome, it's my pleasure. They said, no, we'd like to say thank you. I went, it's my pleasure, it's okay. It was thank you and goodbye. And that was it. And they said, we'd like you to go now, by the way. And I said, well, can I just give Diego a hug? They said, no, it's goodbye. And I went. And I didn't see him for about 7 years. And they're making a documentary about him now, actually. There's the guys that did the documentary. There was a big documentary recently on someone, I can't remember who it was now. Anyway, they're making it, and Diego was given a list of names of people, and he said he'd like me to be in it, so I'm going down to film it in a couple of weeks' time, which will be cool. Sorry, did that answer your question? It's a bit of a ramble.
No, that's brilliant, thanks.
That was interesting. And my final question before we leave this room is, do you think that Jorge Mendes is the most powerful man in football?
No, I think the most powerful man in football is Mark Zuckerberg.
Okay.
I mean, Jorge's great, and he's taken what I did to a new level. He now goes to clubs like CSK Moscow and does a deal with the ownership that all the players in and all the players out. So mega money. So he's doing the same at Wolves here with the Chinese ownership. He's got a joint agreement with them. So he's taken that to a whole new level. But Mark Zuckerberg is the most powerful man in football today, and will be for some time, unless other people create platforms where they can share the wealth with the supporters, which will be that's going to happen as well.
Okay, thanks. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Jon Smith for an absolutely fantastic talk.